And we've got a great show coming up for you this afternoon on We Are Unique. And if you want to email the show, you can do. It's wau@europentv.com. Do email your thoughts and suggestions, or even if you want to be a guest on my show, do please send in your emails. This afternoon we have got a fantastic show, and I'm joined this afternoon by Libby Hill, who's speech and language therapist. Good afternoon, Libby. Thanks for joining me.
Good afternoon, Kevin.
It's great to have you on. So tell us a little bit, start off with, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm a speech and language therapist, and I specialise in children with autism. And so my job's a bit of a troubleshooting job, because I tend to have referrals of children who maybe they've been expelled or they're on the verge of being expelled, and it's not clear that they've got any language or communication difficulties. But they have, and that's the reason why they're behaving as they are. So if you can look at the reason behind their behaviour, you can do something about it, and it makes such a difference. So I could never be bored, because there's a lot of detective work involved in that.
Yeah. So I know, as a person living with autism, I know a little bit about PDA, and I'm aware that it was first identified in the early 80s by a lady in Nottingham. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right, yes. Yes, it was Elizabeth Newson, and she had a lot of referrals who she knew they got autism, but they didn't fit the usual criteria for autism. Or they did, but they've got this extra set of characteristics. And she realised that there were actually a set of characteristics that all these children satisfied. And previously, they were either described as having atypical autism, but what does that mean? Or pervasive developmental disorder. And again, what does that mean? So she looked at the criteria, and she realised that these children fitted all of them. And when she showed parents, they were saying, yeah, that's my child, that's it. And these criteria are different to typical ASD. So the first one is that they will obsessively resist demands. And I don't mean big demands, I mean, can you go and clean your teeth? So obsessively resisting the demands of everyday life.
So if you told a child with PDA, go and brush your teeth, how would that child react?
Well, it depends on the day and their own tolerances and thresholds, how they feel. But you could have, and quite often would have, an explosive meltdown. And if you think about...
Is that because they don't want to do it, or...?
Some way they can't cope with the demand of having to do something. They want the control, because it's an anxiety-driven disorder. So they need control to help their anxiety.
Right. So could that child correct me if I'm wrong, could that child then be seen, if it was in the, let's say, the neurotypical world, could that child be seen as being a naughty child? Yes,
and the trouble is these children are seen as naughty children, or that it's a parenting issue. Well, it must be their fault. And, so many parents who take their child out and something happens, instead of the general public seeing it for what it is, which is actually that it's an anxiety attack. So that meltdown is an anxiety attack. It's a symptom of their anxiety. But the general public won't see it like that. They'll feel that that's a parent who's lost control. And it's a different dynamic between parent and child if a child has PDA. So that normally, obviously, we're the adult, they're the child.
Yeah.
You do what I tell you to do. It doesn't work like that with PDA. The dynamics have to be different. One of the other characteristics is a lack of identity of their self. So quite often they don't see themselves as a child. So they won't see, well, why does someone have to tell me what to do? Because I'm equal, I'm the same. And so the parent has to do a lot more negotiation than we would normally do. We have to look at low arousal techniques. They have to be very good at de-escalation techniques.
So say, for example, if there's a parent or a professional watching the show today, and let's say, for instance, we've got two children in the room. Say if two children came in the studio now, and one was autistic and one had PDA, how would you know, or how would the professionals know what to look for?
Well, if we go down these characteristics, for instance, a typical child with autism isn't necessarily going to be too interested in just talking to you because they're busy with their own things. A child with PDA might be overly sociable with you because that's another way of controlling. So their social skills appear on the surface to be really, really good, which obviously with typical autism, we wouldn't say that. But it is actually a veneer. So they haven't got the understanding behind it. So the social thinking isn't very good, but they've learned what works. There was a girl the other day, and she always says she saw this baby, and she said to the lady, "Oh my goodness, what a beautiful baby. You must be so proud." And the woman was delighted. And what a polite girl, how lovely. But what she doesn't know is she will say that to her tomorrow when she sees her again, because she knows that works and she knows that people like that. They also have sufficient language skills to manipulate and to argue. And so again, on the surface, it looks as if they're very ably communicating. But what they're not showing us is that they probably have language processing difficulties. They usually have a slight processing delay. So all these things make them much more anxious because they're bright, so they know about these things. They know that they don't always get the social cues. They know their language processing is slightly lacking. And the other difference that's really important is while a typical child with ASD will have an obsession, it's usually with a thing or a TV programme or something that's inanimate. And a child with PDA, it might be that, but it's much more likely to be a person. And that obsession can go one of two ways. So it can be they're completely obsessed with that person and they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread and they will follow them to the ends of the earth. Or, in many cases, it's a hatred. So I'm thinking of one particular girl that I saw last week, and this boy in her class has only got to, breathe the same air really for her to be absolutely furious. But if she looks and he's glancing in her direction, then that's enough to set her off. So the obsessions are different. They're social obsessions.
So is it would we say it's difficult to diagnose, or would we say a lot of children go undiagnosed?
A lot of children go undiagnosed. In actual fact, it isn't that difficult to make the diagnosis, but most areas are not recognising it because it's not part of what they're clinically commissioned to do. And so it's falling in the gaps. So sometimes they'll go and they won't get an autism diagnosis because they're making great eye contact. They're very, very sociable. They're talking in beautiful sentences. So the parents go away completely deflated. In other areas, because it's not recognised yet with the DSM-5 or the ICD-10, people are saying, well, it doesn't exist, so they've got autism. But the strategies are completely different, so it's not helpful. But there are so many parents out there, and I'm so grateful for the chance to come and talk to you today, because there's so many parents and families out there who I know and others that I know of who are struggling massively. And we just need to recognise it.
So we know that it's not a new condition because it's been around since the 80s. So why do you think that people in general, such as professionals or teachers or even doctors, for instance, are not aware of it?
Partly because it's not part of the clinical commissioning group's design, but also because it's not in the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. There are a lot of professionals who do believe it and will diagnose it. The Elizabeth Newson Centre in Nottingham is probably the best known place where you can get a diagnosis.
So is there like a national umbrella or a national charity for PDA? Or an
There's the
organisation?
PDA Society, and they do some tremendous work.
Yeah, and do you have a website for them?
Yes, can I put it on afterwards,
sure,
if that's all right? Because they've got a good series of webinars which goes through, what is PDA, looking at PDA and managing the anxiety. And it's a really good source of support for families. And it's not just, you were saying it's not new, it certainly isn't new, because there's a lot of adults out there with it. And the helpline at the moment is having more calls from adults who believe they have it.
And there can probably be a lot, like you say, there's a lot of adults who may slip through the net.
Definitely, yeah.
So say if mum and dad are at home and they're watching this today and they may have an adult who's on the autistic spectrum,
Yep.
how would they recognise, or how would they see whether that adult has got PDA? Does it change from child to adult, or have they got the same symptoms? Or
the criteria, the characteristics will be the same, but it's like with autism as well. As you grow older, you adapt better.
yeah,
So you tend to put yourself in situations where you are happier or more familiar, and where you haven't got the demands that are going to tip you over the balance. So I would say that it's not as recognised perhaps in adults as it should be, but then the adults have changed and adapt. Because we're talking about, you know, to use it, I'm not very keen on the term high functioning autism, but these are bright people, so they know.
yeah.
What they
Can we
need
just
to do.
can we just come back to
Yeah.
that? What you just said about you're not keen on about high functioning autism, because that is really key. Because I always say that, you know, to me as a person living with autism, there's no such thing as high functioning autism. You're either autistic or
Yes.
you're non-autistic.
Yes, and I would agree with that.
You know, I can see that there's some people out there who may be savant, who can be very, very clever, can be geniuses, you know, have phenomenal IQs. But to me, and I always find it really disappointing when, you know, even professionals say, well, it's a mild autism, or it's a general autism, or it's a high functioning autism.
Yeah.
So how would you?
I'm like you. It's autistic spectrum, because no two are the same. I mean, the best quote is, you know, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism.
Correct.
And what I don't like about the term high functioning autism, I don't like the opposite, because that would mean low functioning.
Yes.
and that's not nice either, because
Yeah.
it may well be that we just haven't tapped into what makes them tick. So we should be looking more, you know, for what works for that individual person.
So do you agree with, you know, when they changed the diagnostic criteria, because they've sort of got rid of the Asperger syndrome now?
Yes.
Do you agree with the whole universal label as when somebody's diagnosed with autism now, it is autism?
I do, because I met so many people who had the diagnosis of Asperger's, but actually they had severe learning disability. And then it was sort of, well, I don't want my child to have autism, but I don't mind them, they have Asperger's. So it was too woolly for me and too airy-fairy for me. And I, having talked to lots of adults with autism, I like just, you are autistic. Not you have autism either, because that's what I was saying before. I was saying it's a person with autism. And it was actually Dean Beadle who said to me, no, I'm autistic. If I am with autism, that means I could leave it behind.
Yeah,
As
sure.
I am autistic.
Well, we're going to talk more about PDA just after the short break, so do join us back.